Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. My guest today is my friend Greene, who joins me from France, but she's originally from the US and has been somewhat of a neighbor of mine in Spain for the last few years down in Javia, and has been a digital nomad and remote work advocate for many, many years. So she's very well respected in that space and has a ton of information to share for brand new digital nomads and the seasoned veterans. She has something insightful on all aspects of building a life abroad. And so it was just really fun to catch up with her, talk about the new book that she and Tamara Sanderson have just written called Remote Works. We talk about being a digital nomad in a sustainable way and building community and tribe around the world and how to make this lifestyle work, both from a professional standpoint, but also from a personal one. And like I said, she has a ton to share on both aspects. So this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and I believe you will as well. Please help me in welcoming Ali to About Abroad. You know, I find it kind of hilarious that you and I have actually never met in person. And we lived we're from the other side of the pond. We both lived over in Spain for many years, and we both find ourselves not in Spain now. And we've only met virtually, but we have this weird friendship going on as well. I find this amazing.
Yeah, it feels like we've met in person, and I sometimes have to remind myself that we haven't, which is something I love about my internet friends in this nomad remote workspace, but especially with you, because I feel like you've been to Javia, which is where I've spent a good amount of time. I've been to Valencia more times than I can count, because that's the airport I would always fly in and out of, and somehow our paths have never crossed. And even in our nomad travels lately, I feel like some of the same countries that you're drawn to are countries that I visit, but never in the same months of the year. So at some point, Chase, 2023, maybe we'll meet in person. But for now, being on Zoom is pretty much the same thing. So I'm super excited to talk with you now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, this serves a purpose. You know, we're both big fans of we're obviously both in that remote work world and advocating for that. And we also have this cool overlap, I think, in the retreat space. We value the working from a distance and the flexibility that provides in our personal lives, but we also really value bringing people together. And so I think this serves enough of a purpose for us right now. We're we can do this Zoom thing. But we both probably crave that in-person time. You're right. I hope we get that in 2023.
Yeah, maybe Portugal's the place to be. So.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned Javia, and I find this such an incredible place that is, I guess it's not real. I don't know if you'd call it a hidden gem within Spain, but I would imagine my perception is internationally, it's not a place that nomads know about or people come and move from abroad to go to, but it's a magical part of Spain that I really fell in love with, sort of as my disconnect from Valencia when I wanted to get away from the city and enjoy actual pretty beaches and that coastline that you think of when you think of Spain. That's where I would go. But I don't know, you lived there for a while. Did the luster fade or what?
So I have a really interesting relationship with Javia because it's been weaved through so many different stories of my life. So when I started being completely identifying with the word digital nomad, I found myself learning about a co-living space called Sun & Co. in Javia. It was really funny because once I finally went there, I remember going back with the community manager and being I must have been the hardest sell to close a client because we emailed each other for over a year before I could actually make it work that I could visit Sun & Co. because I was doing my first year nomading, but I still had a home base in Philly. And so I would spend half the year traveling, half the year in Philly. And I had very specific dates that I was playing around with. And I remember going to Madrid and being oh, I'm in Madrid. Maybe maybe I should go to Sun & Co. And they were booked. And then I was like, okay, never mind. Like, I'm going to go to like Thailand instead, which is like random and how I used to nomad back then, just like all over the world. And then finally, like years later, or a year later, I was in Granada with my mom on vacation, like not even nomading at that point. I was like, I really want to stay in Spain. One of my digital nomad friends is going to be at Sun & Co. Like I have to make it work this time. And so I went to Javia, I went to Sun & Co. and I had this amazing co-living experience after having not super great co-living experiences in the past and still being on this mission to experience every version of what was available to a remote worker and a digital nomad that existed in the world. It was this phase of exploration in my life. And I was immediately hooked on Javia and Sun & Co. And I found myself, I kept going back there and I put it in my routine. And so it sort of felt like this way of grounding myself, the way that when I was traveling and I had a full-time job, my full-time job grounded me no matter where I was around the world. And so I kept returning to this place. And then in a very like meet cute way, I met my boyfriend at Sun & Co. And so we have this like warm place in our heart for it. And when the pandemic hit a couple of years ago, we were initially in lockdown in France. And we were like, I was working on finding a way to be able to spend more time in Europe. And for a while now, I was going through the process of getting a visa to be in Spain. Of course, everything was slower with COVID. And finally, I got my visa. And before the visa had to happen, as you know, going through the process as well, you need to decide where you're going to live and have an apartment. And the only place we could think of was Javia. We were like, this is the place we have in common. Like, this is the place that means something to us. And so we went there, and like a word of warning I have for nomads that go to like their dream location to live is that being a digital nomad and returning back to the same place and trying to be an expat and living somewhere are two totally different experiences. And so you can't go into that with the same set of expectations, which was the first mistake I made when I immediately moved to Javia. But after spending 2 winters there, spending my time throughout COVID there, I gained a new appreciation for it. And I learned how to like it both as a foreigner living there, as a digital nomad, but I also got a more real look at all of the pros and cons of what it was like to live there for 6 or 9 months out of the year versus just being there for like a month every 6 months, which is now something that I'm looking at everywhere I go in the world. And I'm like, being a traveler, being an expat, being a nomad, being a slo-mad, they're like totally different things. And you just have to ground yourself and have the right expectations going into things.
Yeah. Do you feel called at this stage in your life to one of those areas or another?
Oh, it's such a constant struggle right now.
I know. That's why I asked, because it totally is for me too.
My plan for 2023 is to like create my own like alley version. I've experienced so many different ways of traveling since I first started living this lifestyle. Gosh, must have been back in like 2014, 2015, from like having a home base in the United States and constantly returning and trying to like maintain the same depth of friendships in the United States and the same depth of professional relationships in the United States while still traveling. And I felt like I was living these two lives. And it was hard for me to put them together. And then I let that go and I became a full-time nomad, but in a really disjointed way. Like every 3 weeks I was going to a new country. Like you hear of nomads like me where it's like, oh, Allie's in Vietnam. Oh, Allie's in Mexico. Like, what's going on? Those are on 2 different sides of the world. I was no stranger to long flights, like could fall asleep as soon as I sat down. But my goal and my intention in that fast travel was always to travel to build connections within this community and to cultivate relationships that mattered to me, because I knew at the time I was working probably like the most challenging job of my career. And so I knew I was going to stay focused on work. I knew I was going to have that to hold myself accountable. But what I was seeking out was learning about what this life could look like in a sustainable way. And for me and my personal values, that's friendship. I didn't realize that traveling in that way, you could burn out in other ways. Like it's just very exhausting and confusing to be in different time zones every other month and like changing meetings around or like figuring out your sleep schedule. But I still felt young at the time. I'm now, like many people after COVID, feeling a little bit run down. And I don't think I will ever go back to traveling that fast. But I do wonder what a nomadic life looks like, where you have places you love, places that are easy that you can slip back into the routine, go there often, cultivate relationships with people there, go back and visit home, because I think there's something super nostalgic about seeing friends from your past, reconnecting with family. And then for me, I get so much creativity and inspiration from traveling to new places and thinking about my goal for 2023 is how do I want to approach those new places? Do I want to travel to those new places alone and rebuild some independence? Do I want to go to those places with my partner and have it be like these really special moments where both of us can connect to each other? Or do I want to go with friends or new nomad friends or meet people or meet other remote workers like you? Like, how do I want everything to fit in? So it's a big puzzle to figure out. I would love to know like how you're thinking about it this year, because I know you've started traveling again too. Help me think about this, Chase. So how are you figuring it out?
I think we might be very similar in that we're like constantly building this like calendar in our head. So like I've been piecing together like what my perfect year would look like. And it would be something like 6 months in 2 different places with about 2 to 4 weeks twice a year back in the US. So I'd get to like kind of slo-mad in 2 different places. So like, for example, looking at the upcoming year, it could be like Croatia and Greece with a trip in the first semester back to the US. I'm going back for like my brother's wedding, for example. And so spend 2 to 4 weeks then, and then go back again later in the year, 2 to 4 weeks. And then I want to mix in like a few, like I'll mix in some work trips I'm getting to go to like Madeira, I'll go to Italy for work and like a couple other things. And then like I want to mix in one kind of like off the beaten path trip, like somewhere where I'm just like a bucket list place that just has eluded me. And I'm just going to go for like a week on my own or something like that. Like a place that comes to mind
What
is
is
like
that
we were
right now?
so like we were supposed to go to, I guess it's not like off the beaten path, but it would be off the beaten path compared to like Euro road tripping in Spain and France, like I've been doing the last couple years. Like we were supposed to go to Italy last year, but not Italy, Egypt last year. But my wife got COVID like right before, like 2 days before we were supposed to go, so we had to cancel the trip. But we had like 2 weeks planned of Nile River cruises and visiting the pyramids and all that stuff. And another place that comes to mind is like I've never made it to Istanbul, and I'm just like dying to go to Istanbul. And so whether I like make a real vacation out of it or like just like a quick 3-day weekend or something, like I just want to have some spontaneous trips like that thrown in there as well.
Yeah, that's cool. I bought comedy show tickets randomly a few weeks ago. I was meant to be I love to do this thing where I work on weekends and I do random spontaneous day trips on weekdays when people are working, because I'm selfish and I like to have beautiful tourist attractions to myself. And on weekends, I don't like to fight with other tourists to like take pretty pictures or to like go to the best restaurant. That's a remote work / digital nomad hack for all your listeners. Unfortunately, my plans got like totally destroyed. And as soon as we got on the highway, the car broke down. And so like me, I immediately just like jumped on LinkedIn and started responding to messages and went to Asana and started like looking at all of the tasks that I assigned myself for the next day and was doing them in the lobby of the car place. But when I wasn't doing that, I bought comedy show tickets in April to like somewhere in the UK. And I was like, oh, I really like this comedian. All of the show dates are sold out, like everywhere else in Europe. I'm going to the US for a month and a half, but she's not playing anywhere that I'm going. So I just bought these tickets and I was like, I'm going to plan a co-working trip around this comedy show. And how cool that I'm lucky enough to live this lifestyle that there's just things that bring me joy. And then I can plan everything else around that instead of trying to fit joy into my normal routine. And I need to remind myself that I can do that, because I forgot how to do that the past few years. And I think a lot of other people have forgotten how to do that. And like we can do that again. And it's exciting.
We can do that.
And like people should. Like
And
that's
it would be a shame not to take advantage of it, right? Like we have this flexibility that many of us sacrificed other things for, which I think is kind of cool. Like these days, this flexibility is becoming more and more accessible, which I think you and I both want. But we also lived through a period of our careers where you had to sacrifice a lot to get this freedom. And now that it's accessible, it sometimes feels like you're afraid to utilize it. And I think the pandemic had something to do with that, and also just like the culture around what work should and shouldn't be. Like, you and I have talked about it before, how we almost felt like the digital nomad aspect of our personalities was something that you didn't have a platform to really talk about it, or it was just something that you didn't really bring into the professional sense, almost like you had to hide it, maybe. I don't know if that's true for you or not, but like we can utilize this, and there's more companies embracing that way of working and not seeing it as so weird. And it would be a shame not to use it.
Yeah, definitely. For me, it was always like, this is a part of my identity that I feel very strongly about, but it's not a part of my identity that is necessarily serving me professionally. And so the more I talk about it professionally, I think it blurs my goals, at least at first. But then the longer I thought about it, at the time when I first started really nomading, I was, head of people at a fully remote company. And so I had to take a step back and be like, this is bringing me so many personal benefits to travel. It's filling a piece of my identity that I felt was missing. And also, I get to experience what life is like for our employees that are in super remote time zones. We actually planned a whole retreat around that for other people to experience that, to like build empathy at work. I get to realize the flaws in our processes based off of what my personal boundaries are. And so I remember living in Vietnam and saying like, I'm happy, like I work in HR. I know I have to take more meetings than like the perfect remote company, for example. One, because I want to connect with new employees. I want to connect when people are struggling and they don't know how to talk to. And two, like, frankly, it's a part of a role of someone in people operations. But that doesn't mean I'm available on call 24/7. Like I'm not an ER doctor. So like what makes sense for me in Vietnam? And it wasn't trying to fit into 9 to 5 where the majority of the employees were. It wasn't trying to encourage them to fit into that for me in Vietnam. What ended up working for me was like 6 to 8 a.m. and 6 to 9 p.m., which seems super disjointed and weird for a lot of people. But I explained that's actually really fair for everybody. It's not too early or too late for either person. For me, it's okay. And for someone in the East Coast, it's just those same hours reversed. It's okay. And to shift that mindset is something I'm seeing people do more of now, not just in companies, but also in the digital nomad circle. Like I go to co-livings quite frequently. I love the community there. Something I get really frustrated is we're supposed to be, I think, maybe this is, I hold people to too high of expectations sometimes, but I feel like digital nomads, we are supposed to be the pioneers of what the future of work can be. And I go to these places and so many times I see people just sitting in these beautiful spaces, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, working on their laptop. And I'm like, okay, yes, you're working remotely. You have the freedom and the flexibility to do so, but you're just recreating the office life in a more beautiful office with strangers instead of your coworkers. Like, does that actually work for you? Like, are you actually more productive? Have you experimented doing something differently? If yes, I respect you like so much. If you're only doing it because society has told you that that's how you work best and you've never tried to unlearn that behavior, then you're not, I'm sorry, like sounds like mean and judgmental. You're not as innovative as you could be. And it's in a way doing a disservice to pushing things forward for people that can benefit from this lifestyle that aren't just us. Like, I feel very lucky to be me as a digital nomad, but what about people with chronic illness that need to sleep during the day? What if people that have childcare, parental care, and they have appointments to go to? What about people that, have other sorts of just like issues that they're dealing with in their life and they can't or they won't work 9 to 5, but they can get great work done at like 2 a.m. Like, we should not leave those people behind professionally just because like people aren't experimenting. And so for me, like being a digital nomad, traveling is one of my favorite things in the world. I love it. Like, I love even the logistics of it. I can spend hours window shopping on Airbnb, but like for me, that's what this lifestyle is about.
I could relate with so much of what you're saying, both on like the future of work side and on the travel logistics side for sure. I have a weird addiction to like shopping for flights that I'm never going to take and looking at Airbnb listings and creating spreadsheets that analyze all of it. It's just it's just way too much fun. Only you would nerd out on this with me. But I guess that's also like kind of how we got into like planning retreats for our teams and stuff, and like getting into that space, because we do just love it. Like, I don't know if this happened to you. I had somebody at our most recent retreat at Duis, because I know you were planning them at DuckDuckGo. Like and you've done some other really cool ones that I would love to dive into just on like more of like a personal basis. But like I had someone say to me at the last company retreat where I think we had about 80 something employees, and we'd come in from like 30 different countries, and we're there in Austria and we're having like a good time. And I'm just like really enjoying it. And somebody said like, man, I don't know how you're dealing. Like, how are you having any fun? Like, this seems like so much work. And I was like, it legitimately kind of shocked me, because I was like, oh, you guys think this is a lot of work. I'm just having fun. But other people see this as like a lot of work. That's awesome. Like, I'm glad to hear that, because this is like my little hobby on the side anyway. So I don't know. I gather you have the same sort of perspective.
It's really funny. Yeah, you have to take a step back sometimes. And I get reminded of this all the time. It's not something that comes naturally to me. What you find fun and interesting and easy to do doesn't mean that other people find it fun or interesting or easy to do. And the more you can learn that about yourself and about other people, like the better it is to collaborate with people, but the more you can just like own up to something you're good at. And for me, like retreats, I always joked at DuckDuckGo, it was like, it was like planning prom. I didn't go to my high school prom, so I don't actually know. But for me, it was like that joy and excitement and like energy of like getting everyone together. And I was so happy to do it every year. It was like the event I looked forward to was like the all hands retreat. Like, yeah, there were the team retreats. Yeah, there were the co-workations. Yeah, I did personal digital nomad retreats on the side. But for me, that was like the pinnacle. And even like on a smaller scale, like I've been trying to organize just like co-working lunches, or in Spain, like I went to a few experimental like creative groups of like, let's just get people together, and we're in totally different industries. Like, you own a yoga studio, I'm writing a book about remote work. Like, on the surface, we have nothing in common. But what happens if, once a month, us plus a photographer plus someone else gets together and we have breakfast together? What does that look like in terms of building a community? And retreats for me, and digital nomad life for me, and everything we're talking about to me goes back to what's missing. And what's missing so much for people these days is we're more connected than ever, but we're less connected than ever. And that's why I love the revival of in-person time, because people forgot that like remote work includes in-person time. In-person time with friends in your local community, in-person time with your coworkers, in-person time with digital nomads, like for me, in-person time with like different versions of how I define my family. And that's really cool. And like, I don't know, it just makes me so happy to see that people are thinking about these things differently now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the myths that floats around out there is like that remote work is like lonely, and you end up I've heard a lot of people criticize the digital nomad lifestyle that way. Like, oh yeah, that's great, you're just backpacking around with no real friends, and you don't have any close connections. You're obviously running from something. I've heard all of these things mentioned. The Malcolm Gladwell comments about remote work, how you're just like sitting lonely in your bedroom in your underwear, doing nothing, no friends, no social connections, and like the truth is, I'm not like 100% against those criticisms or comments, because the worst versions of these lifestyles can look a lot like those descriptions. And so it's okay to like acknowledge that, like, yeah, the worst version does look like that, but that doesn't have to be the norm. And most people that get good at this lifestyle, whether we're talking about like remote work or digital nomads or expats or whatever, they fill that void with something. Like if you don't have your office friends, quote unquote, like you do meetups like you're talking about, or you join a gym and you end up actually going to that gym because you go at the time that works best for you, not during your like 1 hour arbitrary free time that you get in the middle of the day, or you travel and you meet people at co-livings, and like, so you fill that void and build a social community around you. I think you have more agency over it in this way. And so actually you just get a better quality in the end if you take advantage of it.
Yeah, and it can be really hard. I've been on both sides of that sentiment. I've had really low periods living this lifestyle. Especially when I first started out, I was single, I was young, I was really invested in proving myself professionally, and I was traveling alone as a digital nomad. And I didn't yet know that these communities existed. And I traveled to places where, especially when I was first starting out, like I didn't necessarily feel the most comfortable to explore, like, for example, if places were dark outside. And so I cultivated a life for myself at the very beginning where I really was a lone wolf. I would go to a beautiful city and I would spend the morning walking around, seeing sights, like sitting in a cafe. I think for where I was in my personal life, I needed that. And then I would go home to my Airbnb and I would just work until I was ready to go to bed. But that's not a sustainable way of living this lifestyle. So if you're seeking adventure, if you're seeking travel, if you need some time to like reflect inwardly, to just do that a little bit here and there is fine, but it's not going to be forever, because towards the end of that experience, I was feeling incredibly lost, very lonely, wondering like, did I make a mistake? Is it too late to move back to the community I just left? It's now been like a year. Are those friendships going to be still as meaningful to those people that I just like, flew across the world and was like, bye, see ya. And then I realized like, okay, I can't be the only one feeling this way. I started going to like digital nomad communities, travel groups, co-livings, but even still, it took me a while to learn how to ask the right questions to make sure it was a good fit for me. And so I remember really early days still going to one in Colombia. I spent 1 month in Colombia alone. I met up with some coworkers and I did 1 month of this travel program. And I felt, again, in this travel program so lonely, even though there was 12 of us like living together. And it took almost a full month to even learn vaguely personal things about each other. And I realized like Colombia and Allie, like we don't mix. Like I don't really party. Like I love street art. So I was very drawn to Colombia for the street art, for that. But like I love to go hiking. Like I love to be outdoors. I really like small towns. I don't like big cities. I don't like staying up late. So like, why would I have chosen that place, that community? Like looking back, I'm like, duh. But at the time, as someone new to traveling, you just hear Colombia is great for digital nomads. And I didn't ask any questions. And I learned, okay, you need to ask, like, how do you choose the activities that you do as a group? Like, do you decide them together, or are they part of the program that you're paying for? Like, what are the other people looking for that are coming on this trip? And I learned, similar again to like how you might plan a retreat for your company. For me, picking a digital nomad location like Colombia or Spain, like a small town like Javia, comes down to three things: like the curation of the people. Am I going to have shared values with them? In a company, you know that through a hiring process. How do you find that out about yourself when you're traveling? You need to ask questions. You need to figure out even of yourself, like, could I just put myself down somewhere like Chiang Mai or somewhere like Lisbon where there's tons of nomads? Am I extroverted enough to go make that effort and balance work? If the answer is no, then maybe that's not a good place for you to go travel to. So you really need to know yourself to live this lifestyle, I think. And then it's like, what types of shared experiences can you have to bond with each other that actually sound fun? For me, I'd rather go hiking with a group of people or cook together than go to a bar. It's like, I shouldn't go to cities where like nightlife is the main attraction. Like, of course, that's not going to work for me. And then finally, like, how do they intentionally help you interact? So there's certain co-livings that for me, when I was like earlier in my career, was great because they would have these skill shares and I would learn so much about like SEO and about like how engineers think and someone in people ops, to just get little glimpses of all these challenges that other teams were focusing on, was so much more of a learning and development experience than anything any company could have offered. But now I'm in a place in my career where, like, unless I want to shift into SEO, like I think I know the basics enough. And I don't want skill shares where there's like a set format. I want intentional interactions, like having time to really go deep personally with someone. Like I want to have really meaningful conversations, which is why I ended up creating my own nomad experiences sort of halfway through this. And to go full circle, like now I'm feeling again quite lonely in my nomad experience. And I have all the tools. I know all the questions questions. And I'm still feeling like, okay, now there's been this huge global shift and so many more people are infused into this space. How do I make sure the people I want to see, our schedules can match up, that we're committed to going to the same places, that we want to see each other on the right cadence? In the cities that I'm finding myself in, as I've gotten older, they're less by my personal choice sometimes, and they're more by constraints going on in my world, in my environment. And yes, I chose those constraints, but there's still things to work within. Okay, these constraints, how do I build things instead of joy in things? And I think that's the difference I've learned after 2 years in Spain, is like the mindset of a digital nomad to joy in versus the mindset of an expat to either be like self-sufficient or introverted or a builder. And trying to figure out like how to get your needs met is going to be the challenge for anyone who wants to live any sort of experience abroad.
Yeah, you talk about it's kind of like you have to create your own reality and not just sit back and accept what's given to you. And because sometimes you'll show up to a place that you were really excited about and you'll find that you're less enthusiastic about it now that you're there. But if maybe you're kind of stuck or you're going to be there for a while or anyway, and you have to kind of recreate the situation. And that's one thing I've loved about following your work is that you have like you've curated. It's one thing to curate like a retreat for your company. We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by my good friends over at Greenback Tax. As an American citizen, I'm from one of only 2 countries in the entire world that requires I pay taxes on my global income, regardless of which country I'm actually living in. So when I started my expat journey back in 2015, I knew my tax situation was about to get complicated. Fortunately, I discovered Greenback and I've never looked back. Greenback is 100% focused on helping U.S. expats with their tax situation. And to date, they've filed almost 50,000 returns for nearly 15,000 happy customers from more than 200 different countries. After 7 years working together, I can say with confidence that they make one of the most painful parts of life abroad an absolute breeze with their automated systems, friendly advisors, and expertise in the very specific niche of U.S. expat taxes. Also, for those of you who may have fallen behind on your taxes or you're trying to get ahead of tax season in 2023, Greenback has your back here as well. They can assist with late filings to ensure you don't encounter any problems with the IRS and to make sure you start 2023 off right. Tax season is on the horizon. Learn more about Greenback today by going to greenbacktaxservices.com via the link in the show notes. Hey guys, if you're still around and enjoying this episode, then I think you might actually like our once a month newsletter as well. If you'd like to sign up, just open up the show notes of the episode you're currently listening to, scroll down, and look for aboutabroad.com/newsletter. It takes about 30 seconds to sign up. It's a fantastic way to support the show, and I think you'll be pleased with the information that we provide every month as well. Thanks a lot for listening. Hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. I think it takes some extra guts to go outside of that and create like nomad meetups and rent castles in France and say like, hey, everybody come to my retreat. And you've done that. And I don't know, I'd love to dive into this a little bit deeper because I think it's unique about you. You may not even realize how unique that is. I don't know very many people that have done stuff like this. And I'm just kind of curious to hear like the origin story of how that happened.
Yeah, definitely. So the castle was my third personal meetup that I've helped build. The first 2 we can touch on quickly, but I do think the castle is something incredibly special. They were all special, but the castle just touched my heart.
French castles tend to be special, yeah.
Yeah.
Just your average French castle.
My standards of where I want to live will never be the same.
The bar has been raised.
So the first 2 meetups stemmed from, actually, I didn't know that she would be my business partner at the time, but my friend Tam and I, and along with another friend, Debbie, we met during a Hackers Paradise trip in Cape Town. And Hackers Paradise is a great travel program for digital nomads that are first starting out, that want to not have a crazy type of like year-long commitment, but they want to dip their toes in the water of nomad travel. And for me, it was an amazing group. I've been on 3 trips with them, but after going through that program, I learned that it was something I enjoyed and I would want to do a few times of a year, but there were still needs for me that weren't being met. And what would it look like if I took this concept and tweaked things so that I could get like my personal needs met? And then I built this list, and so did my other friends. They built their own list, and then we compared notes. And on my list were things like, I really want to create a group that's not afraid to step away from intimacy and friendships and vulnerability. I really want to create a group with a lot of intellectual curiosity, because one thing I love about the digital nomad community is curiosity and openness and exploration to do pretty much anything, like taste weird food, go on a weird, like interesting day trip without a plan, just like rent a car and see what happens. Like there's so much adventurous spirit, but I'm a nerd. Like sometimes I really talk about like weird stuff in a super deep way. Like we created a remote work meetup that was all around that specific concept. What if once a week we just got together and had one very, very intense conversation about things like, is monoculture around the world good or bad for society? What does consent look like across multicultural relationships? And how do you deal with that awkwardness? What does it look like to be part of an in-group or part of an out-group at different stages of personal development, from childhood to being an adult? Just like anything under the sun, and like really, really go deep, like hours about this topic with a small group of people. And I'm like, yeah, I really want to do that. But I also want to do that in a location I've never been to before. And I want to do that with people that I'm going to work with, and we're all going to work on our separate jobs. And like, it's just going to be this like experience. So we did that concept twice. We did it once in Serbia and once in Mexico. And it was more for people that didn't necessarily consider themselves digital nomads. They just had the ability to work remotely and were interested in having intellectual conversations. That was how we curated the group. I personally became the like mother hen and like created shared experiences, like planned kayaking trips and other ways so that it wasn't so serious all the time. And we could like have fun ways to bond with each other and create trust through silly, just like activities. And it was a format that really worked because there was no set budget. There was no like upfront commitment. All these barriers that a lot of businesses have when you're their customer was removed if you're just doing it personally. And people could show up that genuinely wanted to be there. They could pick a place within their price point. They could stay as long or as little as their work schedule or their family schedule allowed. And we could build community in a way that was more flexible. And that was something that I really wanted to do because I didn't want it to become my job. I didn't want it to become my business, but it gave me a lot of joy. And I'm very passionate that people should have hobbies outside of work, even if their hobbies and their work are very closely related, such as me. And then during the pandemic, a friend of mine called me and my boyfriend up one day, and he's like, hey, so I've been like struggling like about this idea, and I really want to like, what if we all just bought a bunch of small houses and we all just like live together half of the year? Like, what would that look like? And I'm like, are we trying to like build a commune? Like, what's going on here? And he's like, no, but like, Allie, like, you know, you kind of used to do those retreats, and like, I want to have like a community of people where there's like, you know, let's say 50% of the community knows each other, but there's always new people coming in that have these shared values, so we can have this like new energy, but also this safety. What would that look like? And something I don't talk a lot about publicly because I don't know really how to identify myself, but I spend time in, I guess, for common language, like a stepmother role sometimes. My partner has children and I care for them like so much and really like to have a positive influence on their life, and I was spending a lot of time with them in quarantine. And we were like, well, you know, what about like nomad families? Like, how are they integrated into what's going on in the world? Like, there's things specifically for nomad families. I don't feel included in that. Like, I personally am not a mom. I don't have a nomad family. Like, these kids go to a regular school. They live quite a normal life. So those things don't always feel super inclusive to me. At the same time, sometimes me and my partner like to just be around other digital nomad couples, and we like to hang out and do things in that space. And sometimes like I just like to be around a bunch of like young people and like do things and that are digital nomad stuff, like go on these random hikes and eat gross weird food, like have a who can eat the spiciest noodles competition. And I was like, how come these types of people don't intermix? And that was something that bothered me. And so we started talking about what this community would look like, and we decided we would do a trial run, of course, at this castle, which is like so beautiful. And do it during the summer so that families could come, people that remote work could or could not come, parents could come. If one parent was taking a holiday, they could watch their kids. So it felt like there was no pressure for anybody. And it was just a way to, we have all of the amenities you need. The co-working is in a separate building. It will be adults only. It will be quiet. It's a private land and it's incredibly safe. So kids can run around in the forest and they'll be okay. Like there's no roads really. Like it's going to be an environment where people can just like be open and explore with each other. And it was so special to me because I didn't think it was going to happen at one point. There came down to a point where we were like, should we just cancel this? Let's just cancel this. But we decided to make it happen. We spent 2 months there. We had some people stay for 8 weeks. We had some people come for only 5 days. And we had everybody. We had teenagers come. We had people in their 20s and 30s that were single that came. And at first they were like scared to interact with the kids because they were like, ooh, what if I accidentally like say a swear word or like what's in? And I'm like, you're not. You're like, trust me, like your boundaries are going to be fine. Like you're going to learn really quickly. And then I remember going downstairs one day after a Zoom call and seeing like the range of kids from like 7 to like the like 70-year-old almost retired guy playing Mario Kart together. And everybody was just having fun. And it was like this big family. And I was like, this can be the future of like community and work and society. We just forgot how to live in these shared spaces and how do we make these shared spaces come back to each other. And for me, that experience was so special. And I learned so much. I learned about what it was like to lead retreats that were that hands-on, that I was not getting paid for. And there were things I liked and didn't like about it. I learned how to manage a space that was that large and deal with like cancellations and things like that I was unprepared for. But overall, I just learned that there needs to be a space moving forward for multi-generational communities to come together, for people that want to remote work, not always, but sometimes to come and experience these lifestyles and the benefits of like different cultures just like mixing together and getting along, because humans have more in common than we don't have in common. And that was super cool to live.
Oh man, I wish I could have made that work. You were kind enough to invite me to that, and we had some other conflict. I'm drawing a blank on what it was at the moment, but that just following along that particular journey was pretty fun from a distance, and I think you touching on the part about like the multi-generational opportunity to connect with people across different borders, not just like culturally, but also vertically in terms of like age and like economic status and all that. Like there is this element that like it brings people together. Like I've always found that super interesting about the whole expat world. Like living in other countries, you suddenly have this like connection with other expats who you otherwise have nothing in common with. And now you're in this random place on this other side of the world, and you and some 70-year-old guy from Bangkok have like this thing in common because you're both in South Africa. And you're like, what? And just like the connections that builds very organically is pretty awesome. And I think like kind of all encapsulated in that event.
Yeah, it was really cool. I hope we can do it again sometime in the future. I have no idea if it will happen. I think why it worked so well is like having, again, it all goes back to curating the right people, making sure it was a safe space for everybody, having clear expectations of like, this is what our workspace is and you can use it. This is what like family friendly events are. And these are how people should behave and interact. It's all those things that we do implicitly in society anyway. And we just forget that we do it. And so when you take it under a microscope, it really allows you to revisit how we can do that across the board, whether it's with a group of friends, whether it's with, like sometimes you have these like summer resorts throughout Europe but people still feel very isolated to me in those. How do you create more of an opportunity for people to engage and interact with each other in those experiences? At work, like even how do you from the get-go, if you're onboarding a new employee, like allow them to know what are acceptable behaviors and what are not acceptable behaviors? Like everybody has to learn those things at some point. Like a common nomad joke I love, and I'm sorry, like I hope it's culturally appropriate. Like I'm also still learning, but is like the joke of if you're planning an event, is it starting at German time or is it starting at like Spanish time, so people know what time to actually show up for it? Like I've been in situations where there was like a dinner planned and I showed up and nobody was there for like 20 more minutes. And I've been in situations where I showed up for a dinner 5 minutes late and everybody was sitting and waiting for me. And I was like, okay, like what's actually okay in the situation of all of the people that I'm with based off of our backgrounds, our expectations of each other. And I think everything in my life at this point comes down to how do you communicate openly with a desire desire to learn and to set expectations so people feel safe to learn, to make those mistakes and to like laugh at them and then like move forward just feeling good. Like that's what
Yeah.
everything should
Yeah.
be about.
Yeah. You have to have fun with this stuff. Like, I mean, it's easy for me because I'm a total dork for these kind of like cultural differences. And have you ever read the Culture Map? Did you read that
No,
book by any chance?
can
Oh
add it's
man,
my
it is so it's just basically a book about all the German time versus Spanish time, just extrapolated out across like everything that's different about us from different cultures. And it's one of the most helpful books that I've ever read in the context of like my work day, because I learned, like, for example, it talked about like the Danish are, for just one example, the Danish are very egalitarian, meaning like they, like in the office, there's not like a lot of hierarchy. Everybody's seen, you see that in like it's a very like the society is very flat. There's not really rich people. There's very high taxes. So they don't really have poor people. And it's just this like very huge middle class. And that extrapolates out to work and how you're seen in the office. The boss doesn't have like a corner office. Everybody sits in the same space. And turns out my boss at Doist is Danish. And so like I learned a lot about his mindset towards work based on just like, I was like, all these things clicked for me. And so I have a lot of fun with this stuff, and my friends at work like make fun of me. They're like, "Oh, Chase, you would be interested in this fun fact about how somebody does this in one country or another country." But I do think you just have to have fun with it and just enjoy it and see the differences for what they are. And like for me personally, I sought it out. Like this is one of the reasons I came to work at Doist, because I wanted to work in a place where I was surrounded every day by people with different accents and different viewpoints and different ways of solving problems. And just like the fun, like kind of daily social stuff, but also like the complex stuff. Like we approach things very differently based on where we're from and the way we're raised and the education system we went through. And I think it's like a superpower for remote teams, which kind of like brings us back to remote work, I guess. But that's like, that's been a very fun part and a very like enriching part of living this lifestyle and working this work style, I guess.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like rewarding, but also like sometimes just like the most triggering and the most challenging thing you can have, which also is good because it's pushing you and making you learn. But every time I'm like agitated in a different country by something and I'm just like, oh, but it should be like this, or like this is really bothering me, and I have to go back and like figure out why I'm so impatient. Or in those situations when I was like a 3-week digital nomad, I would just like leave and I'm like, oh, not good either. Like what happens if you just see this through? How can you do things differently? Like where I'm currently at, it's like impossible to find like a cafe that is open at any kind of normal
yeah.
time.
That drives me crazy. You're in France, is that right?
Yeah, I'm in France right now for the holidays. Like yesterday, okay, it's like, yeah, it's right after New Year's, but like it's the 3rd of January. Yesterday is when we filmed this. And I was like, okay, like the holidays are over, like back to work. I want to go to a coffee shop. So I drive to a coffee shop. It doesn't open till 10 a.m. And I'm like, but people need coffee like first thing in the morning. And I was like, why does this bother me so much? Just like chill, go for a walk first and then work at 10 a.m. And sometimes I had to like put myself in check and be like, why are you being impatient? What is this triggering? Like, what are you supposed to learn from this? So it's like rewarding, but also like constantly my most frustrating thing in the world.
Hey, let's be real on something real quick. All right. Nobody's listening. It's just you and I. We lived in Spain for a while. That Spanish time thing is real. And there were I'll be like 100% honest. There are some ways that it really helped me. Like my Americanism was chilled the F out like quite a bit by just being like, like it's okay that somebody's 10 minutes late. Like the world will keep on spinning, or it's okay that, you couldn't get your coffee at 8 a.m. and it's going to be at 8:30 today. Like your life will go on. But sometimes it was freaking annoying. Like I would get really annoyed sometimes, and it would be like, it was enough to sometimes like the time thing actually above all else was like something that drove my wife really crazy. It was like, I don't know if I can stay here because of this. And so, yeah, there are some realities. I don't know if those kind of things affected you there.
We had an experience once where we had these beautiful like white marble countertops, but in our bathroom and in our kitchen. It's like so not practical. I accidentally left something with metal on the bathroom when I went on a trip, and I came back and there was some rust on the counter. And I always take such good care of places I'm in. Like I get really anxious about these things and I'm like freaking out. I call every single bathroom repair company in the whole entire town. I'm like, this is an emergency. You have to come today. Like, I don't care how much it costs. Like, please come fix this. Call the landlord, like crying, like all of this stuff. The person like was like, it's fine. It's not a big deal. Like one, two, he was like, I can't come today. I can come in like 3 months. I was like, what? Like ended up canceling the appointment even in 3 months and couldn't come to like the day we were moving out and like fixed it the day we were moving out. Like everything ended up being fine in the end. But like I couldn't let go of like trying to control and fix the situation right away. And like I had to learn that sometimes people don't operate on my schedule. And like sometimes things that are a big deal to me because I feel like I'm letting other people down, I should just ask them, hey, is that a big deal to you? Because they didn't care.
Probably your landlord wouldn't have cared either. Like in reality, like that, like, I mean, at least I found, for the most part in Spain, like we have a different expectation about like what maintaining, I mean, that's a perfect example. We had an example where there was some like mold growing on our, on a wall because it was like connected to the shower and the shower had been plumbed incorrectly. So there was water dripping behind the wall, blah, blah, blah. And like, we were like freaked out and we're like letting our landlord know. And she's like, yeah, okay, we'll get it fixed. And then like weeks later, the guy finally comes to fix it, and he just kind of like slaps a coat of paint on there, and we're like, that's not really fixed. He's like, yeah, it's fine. And and like eventually after months, it got actually fixed, but like nobody was concerned about this. And you could say, well, yeah, you were the one living there, but like as the owner of the house, I would have been much more concerned. As a crafts person or the repair person, I would have been more concerned. But they're just like, I don't live in a more chilled out state of mind. And I don't know. Yeah, I had to learn that too. Like, you don't operate on my schedule. It's a growing experience for me.
Yeah, same. And so I just think, yeah, what's incredibly interesting about all of this, to like wrap it up, is like through travel, through like living abroad, you're like constantly challenging your own standards and expectations and learning. And in some ways it's good because I think for me, it's made me chill out a little bit more and let go of things I can't control, which has just opened up more room to breathe. But on the other hand, because I'm very analytical, it's made me realize like, I don't think I personally ever want to live in one place forever because I notice and pick up quickly on pros and cons. And there's only so long in a year that I can adapt to the cons before I want to change my environment and deal with different cons. Because I like problem solving, but then I want it to be a reward. So that's why I like the digital nomad lifestyle works for me, because I'm like, oh, I can spend like 3 months in this place, like figure it out, and then I can move to a new place and figure out those challenges. Then I can go back to the place where I figured out the challenges and like deal with them and chill, and then go somewhere new. And it's just like a constant path of like self-evolution through seeing the world in a really cool way.
Those challenges make this lifestyle fun. And I think it's what's addicting about it is like life doesn't get very mundane, and there's always something new to figure out. And if you enjoy that sort of thing, then it's, you're picture perfect made for this. I'm curious, did you touch on any of this aspect in the book, or is this like did you keep the two kind of separated and just focus mainly on like remote work and the mechanics of like running remote teams?
I feel like there needs to be maybe like another book or just something else. Fortunately, it's such a limited amount of pages. We touched on it in a way because people like you and some of the other experts that we've interviewed shared stories of how they got started. And there are really cool origin stories of remote work that we open the book up with to show people that it's not what they experienced the past 2 years. There's people that have been doing this for a long time in lots of different ways. And I find those personal stories very inspiring, but there wasn't enough room to really dive into the nomad lifestyle. What I do think is the constant, though, are like, for me, the core lessons of travel and digital nomadism and the core lessons of remote work, when you zoom out big enough, are the same, which is, again, like set clear expectations with people, make sure that you're communicating in a way that is as concrete and explicit as possible, but also leaving room for mistakes to happen happen and embrace those mistakes with empathy and humility. Have clear like processes that work for you and work for your company. So in the case of travel, like you and your Airbnb spreadsheets, and in the case of a company, like what is the clear like decision-making pattern that you follow to make sure that there's one person accountable for one task. Like project management basics, like digital nomads are great at that. That's why like I think they make the best remote workers because they can problem solve, they can manage projects, they can be creative when solutions come up. So like while we don't talk about it on the book, a lot of the lessons you can learn in the book will prepare you in a weird way to be a digital nomad if that's something you're seeking.
Have I ever told you this story? I think I've mentioned it. I have definitely mentioned it here on the podcast. So apologies for repeating, but like it's so relevant here. And I think your point about like digital nomads being really great project managers and really great employees in general is so valid. When I applied for my original job at Doist, I had like for some context, I had not worked in the tech or startup space. I came from like a corporate like finance and insurance background. And so I was like kind of like, I don't know how I'm going to serve this company. The role kind of fits, but I don't actually have like the prototypical resume that they would probably want. But one of the questions that the now CMO asked me during that interview was related to like, tell me about a project you've managed in your life that like, it's been kind of chaotic and how'd you deal with it, or, something along those lines. And I told her about like my digital nomad lifestyle and traveling around the world with my dog and all the logistics that had gone into that. And like a big dog, like you're not like, you can't even take the dog on you have to go through like customs and, deal with like all kinds of so the freight companies and things like that. Like it's a lot. And so going through all those details ended up being the thing that she told me later, like that got you this job. Like if we thought like, if you can do that, you can handle any work that we're going to throw at you. And I just think that's important to share, not to like, not because it worked out for me, but I also think it's like people, I believe, have this tendency to think of digital nomading as sort of like childish in a way or something. Like it's for like 22-year-old backpackers that, just want to go like sit on the beach and, sip on margaritas and blog or something and like not really build like a quote unquote real career. And what my experience has been like the total opposite, that these people are totally, there's like a high level of ingenuity. There's a lot of problem solving involved. They're great project managers, great leaders. And so I think there's an evolution there. I think people's minds are changing, but I think that's kind of interesting to shed some light on, I guess.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The two biggest challenges in my career happened when I was a digital nomad. So my career at DuckDuckGo, I started out as their first ever people ops hire, and I was a team of one. In my 4.5 years working there, I was a consultant there before I was hired. I was a digital nomad part-time and full-time. When I was a full-time digital nomad, I was promoted multiple times to the director of people operations. I grew my team. I managed 5 people, changed the hiring process for the company, increased gender diversity for the company. Some of the things I'm most proud of in my career happened when I was a digital nomad. And then on the flip side, when I decided that that career path was no longer suiting me, and I took a step back from that role and I had to revisit what I wanted, I took this scary leap into entrepreneurship with a friend and wrote a book. Her and I didn't see each other in person the whole time the book was being written. And I was traveling around and she was, creating a new life for herself in a new place in the US and also traveling around. And those are things that I'm going to look back on my whole life and be and I did that all while I was doing this thing that people kind of minimize and throw away as this childish escapism thing that people do on beaches. And now we're seeing that's not true. You have incredible business owners doing this. You have families and parents doing this. You have some of the thought leaders I respect the most in our industry doing this. It has nothing to do with how intelligent you are, how hardworking you are. And I think that's the biggest point that I will fight for in my life is that you can choose to live an alternative lifestyle and it doesn't make you lesser than, and sometimes it even makes you more than.
Yeah, you and me both. We will jump up on that soapbox together. I want to ask you one last question before I let you get back to this and also to provide some information where people can follow along. You've talked a ton about community, and I knew that about you, but I realized it even more through this discussion. Your mention of co-livings and building, obviously building the retreats that you've done and sort of the humanizing element of this and the connection bit of the digital nomad world and how that rolls over into the remote working world. So I just wonder if you have any like tips, resources, like I'm even thinking like, are there particular co-living brands you like or websites or anything in this whole realm of connection that would be useful to someone who's listening and maybe just getting started on their digital nomad journey? And the reason I ask that particular question, I think it's so important, is probably the number two reason I hear from people when they like write in and want to interact about the show is like, they would do this lifestyle if, and the first one is like kids or like obligations back home. The second one is community and like tribe, I would call it. And so I like to let people know that like you can find your tribe abroad and also not lose your tribe back home. And you've attested to that like 10 times throughout this conversation.
I feel like kind of on the spot because I also think I learned that about myself throughout this conversation today. But I would say
no pressure.
People getting started, don't be afraid to do the things that might seem out of your budget or might seem like it's in a way too much of a baby step, because even as a seasoned nomad, I still revisit those experiences and places. And so for me, it's things like Hacker Paradise, co-livings like Sun & Co, Cloud Citadel, the Chateau Co-living, which is now a permanently open co-living, and you can go there and they do welcome families and children. Ansayou, which is one in rural Spain, which I went to their soft launch and then have seen an incredible amount of growth since then. I haven't had a chance to visit them a second time. Go to those places. And if you're scared, honestly, go for 2 weeks and tell the person that maybe you want to extend for a month. Don't go for less than 2 weeks. I think it takes that amount of time to get out of your comfort zone and start seeing the benefits as a first timer. And after a month, I think you'll be hooked. And what's really special is once you're there, you'll meet people that know and go to the same places. And so you'll constantly run into them. And that's how you start building and growing your network from scratch if you're just starting out. And maybe awesome. I should talk about this more and write about it more. So follow me, stay tuned, and maybe that'll be like a 2023 new goal.
I don't even think you realized it, but you just committed, you and Tam, to writing a sequel already. So we're on launch day of book 1 and the sequel's already been promised. So
your break from Instagram, maybe I'll jump back and share more of my nomad pictures.
Well, on that note, first of all, this has been amazing. The time has flown by, and I really appreciated this so much. So thank you for sharing all that you did. Thank you for writing an awesome book. I haven't had the privilege yet to dive into all of it, but it's launching right as we speak. So this is like amazing timing, and I would love for you to share where people can, first of all, learn more about the book, find the book, buy the book, and then also any other places that they can go to keep following you and learning from you and connecting.
Awesome. Yeah. So the book is Remote Works, remoteworksbook.com, and it's available on Amazon or your local mom and pop bookstore. And you can connect with me socially on LinkedIn, Ali Greene. And now it just seems like I need to reignite my digital nomad Instagram account. So Scene Greene, Greene with an E on the end. And I'll try to keep people more updated on my search for good coffee shops around the world.
I will follow that one for sure. My other guilty pleasure. All those links will be in the show notes for anybody listening. If you want to follow along, please support Ali and go check out the book. It's awesome, and I think it's going to do wonderfully. So congrats on that. I know it was a ton of work. A lot goes into writing a book, and it takes me countless amount of hours to write a worthless little blog post. So I really respect people who can write a book, and especially one that dives into this subject. So congrats, and wishing you the best of luck. And I hope we connect here in real life in 2023.
Me too. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.